obviously, tragic event. And could things have happened maybe to stop it? Of course. But it's one of these things where I'm kind of streaming at this point just to kind of, put my own feelings around, wrap my own head around everything that's happening. And more of a, I don't know, I want to get my feelings out there. I want to discuss this information. I want to hear what you have to say. But I think it's very important that we, go about this in as positive a way as we possibly can, while keeping in mind, of course, the victims that have been affected by this shooting. All right, so let's go ahead and start just with this. So notice I have here pulled up on the screen Mediaite. All right, so this is a left-wing organization. They follow everything pretty much Democratic very positively, and Republican stuff very negatively. And you can see how they're approaching this story. Gunman in Minneapolis church shooting identified. Okay, so of course that's how they're approaching the story. But if you come over here to Gateway Pundits, you'll notice pure evil trans Minneapolis Catholic school shooter identified, had two names, posted manifesto on YouTube before shooting, and the shooter had killed Donald Trump written on his gun, most likely an AR-15 by the look of it. Okay, but notice we're not mincing anything here. We actually have a picture of the individual, not just a close-up of the eyes and nose, but actually the hair, because this person did, in fact, identify as trans. And that's something that, of course, is being left out of these other stories. All right. And this brings up something interesting that we'll talk about in a second. But first, let's just, if I click on this story, it changes from this picture to this. We don't have a picture of the person at all. And I believe there is not one. Yeah, not one at all. So, sources told local news outlet KSTP that 23-year-old Robin Westman has been identified as the shooter who opened fire on the stained glass windows of the church. So, apparently, what has happened is that, this individual rolled up on the church, didn't even go inside, just started blasting through the stained glass windows. All right. So, we have a rifle, we have a shotgun, we have a handgun. Looks like only the rifle was used at this point. We had a big spray of about 50 to 100, bullets passing through. All right. And 2 children that we know of have been killed, and 17 others apparently have been injured at this point. And this story is from a couple of hours ago, but I just wanted to highlight how they're talking about this. Now, the gunman opened fire outside the church at the Annunciation Catholic School ceremonies. This is like the first day opening school. They're having a mass for the kids. Some of the parents were there. The kids were all grouped together, and that's why you have them primarily as the victims. Now, what's not really mentioned here that I can see is Westman left behind a disturbing manifesto and had written hateful messages on his large collection of weapons. Something about Israel, obviously. Yeah, talking about the Holocaust, things that you wouldn't expect, white nationalists to necessarily be, putting out there, but this person is proudly displaying all of them. And so what we're seeing here is not really a mention of the fact that this person was a trans individual. And what I've noticed also in the coverage so far is the media is referring to this person as he. All right. So Robin is the name that he changed his name to. All right. Originally, it was Robert. And I find that interesting because it seems like the media is in kind of a conundrum about this whole situation. Okay, how do they approach this? All right, this person, obviously a trans individual, they're calling him he, but I thought we were supposed to affirm the pronouns, affirm the identity. And that clearly is not what's happening in this case on the media's end. They're kind of not even acknowledging this person's identity. All right, that doesn't seem very inclusive to me, does it? All right, but over here, if you come to the Gateway Pundit, yes, they're going to talk about this person having a large cache of weapons. We're going to talk about this person actually having manifestos online, videos on YouTube, things scrawled all over their weapon, all of this information available. Okay, and this brings up the second point I want to talk about. All right, we have Kash Patel now head of the FBI, and you can think whatever you want about the job he's doing and, Epstein files and all of that stuff, okay? But this is something totally separate. Because if you remember back when we had the Nashville shooting, we had something very similar, right? We had an individual who was also trans, and they decided, you know what, we're going to write this manifesto, we're going to go shoot up the school, kill as many people as possible. So very similar circumstances, okay? However, in that instance, the manifesto was hidden. All right, the manifesto was hidden for, I believe, a couple of months, and it finally got leaked because Steven Crowder got a whistleblower to give them the manifesto, and it turned out it was full of a whole bunch of, anti-Christian, right, Republican, anti-Trump stuff. All right, so we knew what the motivations of that individual were, but only because it was forcibly released. It had to be leaked. Okay, that's exactly what's been happening. Okay, but now, of course, we're over here seeing that, guess what? Kash Patel, now that he's in charge, we have all of this information coming out on the same day. All right, since the shooter obviously is gone, seems like he ended up shooting himself, and are you allowed to say that? How do the kids say it now? They ended themselves? I mean, whatever the case is, that's exactly what has been happening at this point. We already know a whole bunch of information about this person. Okay. Now, of course, the mainstream media, I believe, they're going to try to sweep a lot of this stuff under the rug. All right. And really quick, I do have a couple people commenting over here. Distorted one. Oh, I can't read that at all. I'm a professional here. All right. Yeah, this was a very sad event. I honestly, it's like I'm doing this live stream to kind of just get my own thoughts and feelings out there, put it all in order, because we're going to get a lot of information in the coming days that, could be false, could be true. Everything I say today could be totally just, blown out of the water by tomorrow. But this is the information we have right now. So yeah, this is really, we can all agree, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, this is tragic. But how are we going to address this moving forward? And yeah, this dude was just a psychopath that should have been locked up in a padded room. Absolutely. 100%. All right. And we talk about, preventative measures that could be taken. I'll get to that in a little bit. I have some thoughts on that, so just wait with me. All right. Found a video showing clips of the video manifesto. Yeah, they actually have them. I don't know if I'm going to play any of them because I don't want to give this person, any attention. I've shown the face, obviously. We have the name out there. I don't know if I want to play any of the manifesto. I may read some excerpts from time to time, but I don't know. It's out there, and I'm glad it's out there because this kind of evil can't go unchecked. All right. And then if you pause, you can read a few pages of it. Yeah. I mean, it's right here on the screen. I'm not sure if I want to go ahead and do that. All right. Let's see. Unalived. That's right. Unalived. That's what they call it. That's what the Utes refer to it as, because there's certain words you can't say. Yeah. All right. So back to what we were saying. So Kash Patel, of course, is putting all of this information out there on day one. And what a difference that is when compared to the Nashville shooting, right? Nashville shooting, as I just mentioned, right? It had to be completely unearthed through whistleblowers because the police were holding the information back because it was inconvenient for them to mention that, oh, this was a trans person who committed this shooting. All right. That's exactly what happened. It was basically like a cover up. And then it basically fell out of the news. Right. It completely disappeared out of the news cycle. And I'm willing to wager that this one will also disappear from the news cycle because we have the Democrats, the leftists, right, the mainstream media. They're going to be in a catch-22 over this situation. OK, and I guess we'll talk about this right now, because, I mean, think about what's happening here. What's the normal line of attack from the left after every single shooting? All right. Well, we need common sense gun reform, right? Well, what does common sense gun reform look like? Well, it looks like people essentially just saying, well, we have to take away people's guns. We have to do a whole bunch of stuff. We have to have more background checks. And it's like, okay, we already have background checks, so that's not going to work. Taking away people's guns, what's that process look like? Oh, well, if somebody reports them and deems them to be whatever, then they get a hearing, etc. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about that. In this case, this person, I'm willing to wager, we don't know yet exactly, but I'm willing to wager this person had no priors. Okay, so background checks wouldn't have worked. And the only people that would have been aware of this person's, political leanings, etc., that most likely caused the shooting would have had to have brought up the fact that, well, we know they're a trans individual, and that would actually make them a disturbed individual, and you should take away their guns. So this is why the leftist mainstream media is not going to approach this at all, right? They're not going to broach this information because it's going to hurt them politically. They will have to admit that the only indicator this person pretty much had was their trans identity, their trans violent identity. Okay, now it looks like, yes, he's been stockpiling weapons. We can see we have, looks like a little 9mm there. Looks like we got a revolver. I mean, Obviously, we have the AR-15, the shotgun that was mentioned in the reports. So this individual, what was the indicator? The stockpiling of weapons, right? All of the crazy anti-Trump, anti-Catholic, anti-Israel stuff. I mean, is that an indicator? The trans indicator? Because basically what you have to understand is, remember that being trans, just, 8 years ago was considered a mental disorder. All right. And the last thing you want to do with a mental disorder is go ahead and buy into it. You don't want to propagate that delusion. But that's exactly what the best practices have been in terms of gender affirming care, right? You don't like the way you feel, right? You're feeling depressed, sad, whatever. Maybe you're just in the wrong body. Okay. And that, of course, is the affirmed part. All right. Down here, I got banned for speaking facts during COVID. Yeah. Wolf Friends 42. I mean, there's a whole bunch of information you can't get out there because they're so afraid of misinformation, but really just want to control the narrative. And yeah, COVID was a big example of that. And of course, now, once again, you have the whole trans activity and all these things. Another example. Okay. So all of that, of course, are things that happen. All right. And so it's good to be able to talk about this stuff at least. And that's one thing that I will, credit Elon Musk for. Okay. He kind of went off the rails a little bit, but when he bought Twitter, when he opened up that platform, renamed it X, which I think was kind of dumb, but when he did that, a lot of these other places, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, they all had to open up a little bit as well. They had to allow more free speech because they basically just looked ridiculous. It's like, here we have one of the biggest platforms, right? Twitter, X as it were, out there allowing people to discuss ideas and concepts freely. And you still can't even talk about, COVID or lockdowns or things like that on YouTube. And now, of course, you're allowed to deny elections out in the open. So all of this stuff has changed, and I at least credit Elon Musk for that. So yeah, it's not, what can I say? It's heartening to see that happening, and now we are able to discuss this stuff. All right, let's see. Cindy Nichols, why does these shooters always look like AI conjured something? Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, you see these people, you see the videos, the pictures of the arrests of like all the Antifa people in Portland, etc. Yeah, they look like they're straight out of like a horror movie. All right, they're all messed up. Okay, and you have to understand that, a lot of these people that are so possibly physically unappealing have led some pretty rough lives, and that may have led to some mental disorders, and all of a sudden they're finding acceptance in their weirdness by doing all types of crazy extreme things. I personally think it's all linked, but hey, I am not a doctor, right? Yeah, the proportions definitely all wrong. All right, so just to kind of sum up this segment right before we move on, yeah, notice the difference. Notice the difference in treatment between the Nashville shooter and this one, simply because we have a change in leadership. And also notice how, I'm just going to predict this, I could be totally wrong, but in the future, this story is going to disappear. Right? This story is going to disappear over the next few days because it's not going to mesh up well with the mainstream media, the leftist, the Democrat propaganda piece. All right, because what this is all going to boil down to is going to point to this person being a very disturbed individual who identifies as trans. That is a leading indicator of their mental illness. Okay, and that just blows up this whole narrative right in the faces of the leftists. All right, so that's basically where we're at. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some reaction to this. And when I say reaction, I mean video from the mayor. Let's start with that. All right. Oh, and by the way, this is just to kind of go back on that. This is from the Nashville shooting, a couple of years ago, back in 2023. It looks like it was updated just today, 2025. Mass shooter who killed 6 people at the Covenant School had no grudge against the victims, but was fueled by a quest for notoriety. Yeah, was it notoriety, or was it the hatred they felt towards their own school for their own inadequacies because of their trans ideology? Right? That's what was in the manifesto, right? Not necessarily notoriety, although yes, they did want to, of course, do as much damage as possible and gain notoriety, but what was the reason behind that? All right. So yeah, this is a headline from 3 years ago, updated today. This one was about Nashville. And notice once again, the big difference between the treatment of that story and this one, specifically by the media, but also by the FBI under new leadership, Kash Patel. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this out right now. We have the mayor of Minneapolis talking about this shooting. So let's go ahead and get a little bit of that.
And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church. These are kids that should be learning with their friends. They should be playing on the playground. They should be able to go to school or church in peace without the fear or risk of violence, and their parents should have the same kind of assurance. These are the sort of basic assurances that every family should have, every step of the day, regardless of where they are in our country.
All right, so here's the point, right? We always hear from the left, thoughts and prayers. Those are completely meaningless, but they're not, right? Thoughts and prayers are powerful tools that you can have in terms of healing communities. Now, right now, it's going to be, very difficult and rough and raw for these individuals, okay? But what was the preventative measure here, right? What could have actually stopped this? Because as I mentioned, this person, most likely at this point, had no priors, so background checks would not have worked. All right. Now, take away all of the guns. Well, if we do that, then, of course, the left right now is really upset about Donald Trump, coming into D.C. and taking over that space to make it safe and talking about Chicago and all of that. So if we take away all of the guns from citizens, then who's to stop the government from doing exactly what the left is decrying Donald Trump for doing in order to make it safe for citizens? All right. So obviously, you wouldn't want to do that either. And as I mentioned, what's the key indicator that could have helped here? Right? Possibly getting this person who's obviously mentally disturbed some proper help instead of saying, grow out your hair, wear a dress, change your name, you're a girl, everybody's going to accept you. And when it turns out that, that's not the case, you're going to get really mad and bitter and then cling on to, unsurprisingly, all of the most left-wing ideologies and talking points you can possibly imagine. All right. As I mentioned, this person was already tweeting about, Israel and stuff like that. Right. And we, of course, have them talking about, we won't get into that. I'm not going to talk about the manifesto too much. But this person is bought into the whole leftist ideology, hook, line, and sinker. All right. And the only way to have identified that and stopped that would have been to say that, it's not normal to think that you're in the wrong body. Now, yes, one thing I will mention as well is there are certain, there is such a thing as the, the hormone disruptors. Right. And you may have not heard about this, but, with the microplastics and the chemicals added in the food and all that stuff, some of the MAHA, information. Yeah, there are micro disruptors that actually can cause some gender confusion. OK, but regardless of the cause, whether it's that, whether it's personal preference, whether it's mental illness. OK, regardless of all of that, that would be a leading indicator that something is wrong. Right. Something is wrong. Let's see, back over here. Yeah, the faces are too long. Talking about, the proportions of all the crazy, the Trantifa, as they're often called. Yeah, X is much more fun now, I will admit. Although, what was it, like a month ago, they kind of changed the algorithm. Now they have the for you versus the following. And all that stuff for you is not really for me. It's really where they're trying to get me to follow new stuff. So I don't like that. All right. Hit the like button if you're enjoying your teacher stuff right now. Yeah, please, by all means. It's like I don't have any likes right now. So Distorted One, why don't you go ahead and follow your own advice? Thanks for watching, by the way, and all the comments you get. That's great. But yeah, by all means, like the button. Let's get this out there. Old video from before noon. Yeah. Tim Waltz and what's he saying right now? We just got to have more tampons in the boys' bathroom. I'm sure that would fix all of this. That would make it all go away. All right. So of course, this person's very upset because the thoughts and prayers don't help. We have to have automatic, crackdowns. All you Christians out there, it's useless to pray. So let's get some reaction to this though from the left. Let's check this out. We're going to have a Klobuchar, I believe is her name. Yeah, Dana Bash and Klobuchar talking about the mayor's response to thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, it sure is. Senator, you mentioned that I know that you want to let law enforcement take the lead here, but you just mentioned that you believe that this individual had some kind of grievance, not even related to the school. Is there anything else you can share?
Not really. I just think that they have to get to the bottom of this. As you know, with these scenes from covering so many of them, that there'll be rumors and then they're not true and then you figure it out. But I think this image of this gunman shooting through these windows, picking off these kids while they're praying is something that is going to be with people for a long time. When you think about guns and you think about, as the mayor said, thoughts and prayers just aren't enough here now because these kids were actually praying.
Yeah, I do want to listen to that because that sent chills up my spine. I'm sure everybody's spine when they heard the mayor say that. Let's listen to that moment.
And don't just say.
All right, so a little recap of that point. But yeah, sending chills up your spine when the mayor says that thoughts and prayers aren't enough. All right. Is it enough to be, proactive in terms of raising people up the right way? All right. So this person's parents are going to come into question. I don't know anything about them, but is it possible that maybe the stockpilings of weapons and writing slogans all over everything? I mean, because this person, are they a high school student at this point? I guess I don't have that basic information here. I know I've talked about. All right, here's Internet Sleuthing 101. Go back to the articles I've already referenced. Police have identified 23-year-old. All right, so 23-year-old, I guess we don't know if he's necessarily living at home. Okay, so I can't make that statement. So we want to clarify. We want to be, as accurate as possible. So now we have this individual, and the thoughts and prayers are not enough. What would we have done to stop him? And it goes back to the only indicator being, of course, the trans issues. All right, that's pretty much it. So what are the perceived ideas? What, of course, can be done? All right. Mahler's my God voice, only Prek through the 8th. I'm not sure I understand that, but thank you. Let's see. So we'll get to that in a second. So, of course, they're talking about getting chills because he said thoughts and prayers are not enough. We got to do more. All right. Well, what are your solutions? What would have been effective? What would have been preventative in this particular case? All right. So we already heard his words. Let's go ahead and skip past that, get to a little more of Klobuchar's reaction.
Expressing something that I know you feel and most people feel, which is a combination of sadness, but raw rage. Forget about thoughts and prayers. These kids were literally praying when they were murdered through a church window.
It's unbelievable. And Jacob, the mayor, and his wife Sarah just had a second baby. So I know he knows this just gutturally of how this feels. To think of your own children in that situation. And I think part of what he's getting at here is that there's thoughts and prayers, and then the law enforcement does their job well, and hospitals do their job well, and they save some lives, and people are injured, but there's a whole room of those kids in that church that are going to never forget what happened. That hopefully they'll be able to get through it in their own lives. But you think of that in other mass shootings, it's the immediate death, it's the immediate family, but then it's a whole community. And ultimately, it's an entire nation that has to grapple with the fact of we have too many guns out there right now. And there's all kinds of policy things that we could do that would still preserve people's right to hunt, people's right to collect guns, people's that care about guns for sport and guns for protection. But at some point, when you see these innocent kids praying in a church and they get gunned down by a madman, you have to step back and think, what can we do better? What can we do better with background checks or with assault weapons, which may not have played into this situation? But every situation is different. And there are a number of things we can do that would not hurt law-abiding gun owners, of which there are so many in my state and in our country. And
So that's interesting. She mentions, there's so much we could do where you could actually keep your guns for hunting, keep your guns for collecting, keep them for being, a law-abiding citizen. But then what would you do? And this is where you have to understand, the left is going to have a reckoning. All right, the left is going to have a reckoning with the crazy radicals of their party because they have become very violent. All right. And they've been violent for a long time. Okay. Go back to 2016 when Donald Trump was running for president the first time. Do you remember how after people were leaving the Donald Trump rallies, they were being hunted through the streets by the radicals? Right. I remember them trying to light people's pants on fire and those people trying to run away from being, torched to death. I remember them in large groups hunting down singular individuals, chasing after them and beating them, right? Shirts being torn off. Okay, this is very radical behavior. And that behavior, by the way, has not changed. All you had to see, of course, is, California. All right, what was happening there when all of the, illegals were being rounded up and the local police were not doing anything, either because their own personal beliefs or because it was the beliefs of Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom to stop them from intervening, right? What was happening? Oh, they were trying to burn down the federal buildings. They were trying to stop anybody from entering or leaving. They were holding folks hostage, essentially. Okay. And then, of course, over in Portland, you have them trying to do the same thing, burning down federal buildings, burning down judges, courthouses. All right. These were all things that were happening, right, recently. Okay. So what are we going to do to stop this? What's the real thing we could address? How about the violence of the left? Right? That would be a great place to start. How about it's not okay because you have a difference in political opinion to go out there and attack other individuals, to go out there and attack law enforcement, no less. All right, let's get to some comments over here. Yeah, pulling that trigger. I can't even imagine. It's one of these things. Gosh, I got nothing to add to that. Pre-K to 8th grade. Let's see if I can answer that question real quick here. 2 children, 8 to 10, 14 children injured. We know 17 so far was the last count I saw injured. Two murdered by this psychopath. But I'm not seeing if it was just elementary or if it was high school age. But yeah, so Klobuchar, she promises this time, yeah, we're going to get it right. This time we're going to totally just give you, all you gun owners, you can keep all your guns. We're not going to come after you. It's just going to be this individual. Right? But how would you have targeted him? All right. How would you have targeted him? All right. So let's come over here. Jen Psaki apparently has another hot take on Christianity and all that stuff. Let's see if we can get that to roll here. Looks like it's going to be a X roll. Oh. All right. So not a video, just the next post. Prayer is not freaking enough. Prayers do not end school shootings. Prayers do not make parents feel safe sending their kids to school. Prayer does not bring these kids back. Enough with the thoughts and prayers. Okay, so as I mentioned before, thoughts and prayers are valuable tools in terms of healing, in terms of bringing people together. All right, I do believe that 100% as a Christian man. But what she's saying is thoughts and prayers, enough with that. What's her solution then? All right, and of course, her solution is going to be the same thing as all leftist solutions. We're going to take away the guns. All right, we're going to take away the guns. As much as Klobuchar wants to say, oh, you can keep your guns for shooting, all right, you can keep your guns for collecting, she doesn't really mean that. All right, now, of course, I shouldn't project my own thoughts onto her, but I'm just going off of what every other Democrat and leftist person has said about, supposedly common sense gun reform. All right, and it all circles back once again, right? The left is going to have their pivotal moment here. They're going to have to acknowledge that, yes, transgenderism is an ideology of the mentally disordered. Okay, that's the big indicator in this case. And of course, you have the left in general willing to commit violence against people they don't agree with. We've seen that multiple times. All right. Mahler's my God voice. His mom worked at the school apparently. So that's another link. All right. So in the Nashville case, a few years ago, we had the person was a former attendee at that school and turned trans and got really upset and all that stuff. And here apparently, we've got a target because his mom worked at the school. All right. So I'll believe that. I'll have to take Mahler's my God voice, saying for it, word for it, I should say. But where's the connection, right? What are you going to do? What would you specifically do, Jen Psaki, in this case, in this instance, to go ahead and stop this from happening? All right. I've got some ideas, but what about you? Okay, over here, CNN reporter. lies about basic firearms information while covering Catholic school shootings. Let's go ahead and check this out because as an enthusiast, by no means an expert, I'm interested to see what these people are wrong about when covering
associated with the school would know that this is happening.
Yeah, and oftentimes we see in these school shootings, particularly with religious institutions, it's a former student. We saw that at the Covenant School in Nashville back in 2020.
Oh, sorry. I thought they said former student of this current person. They were talking about the Nashville.
Where the former student, Audrey Hale, killed 3 9-year-olds, 3 adults. We are waiting to learn more about.
Now, they just referred to the Nashville shooter as Audrey. All right. So they're dead naming. Because remember, Audrey was trans. She changed her name to something else. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. They're using the original name. What happened to the affirmation? Right? What happened to that? And of course, this is something the left is going to have to come to grips with, something the Democrats are going to have to start talking about. Okay. Is it okay to just change their names only when they commit murder? Is that the only time you can ever use their real name? All right. Something to think about.
About this suspect or shooter at this 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time press conference that we're expecting from officials there on the ground. It was really disturbing to hear what the man we heard from the affiliate said about how long it went on. He said there were several minutes. Now, we don't know if that was just from the shooter or if law enforcement had arrived by then or the circumstances around that. But he said it sounded like the gun was reloaded several times. It seemed like a rifle, he said, a semi-automatic rifle. And it went on for several minutes.
Right. And look, that's not uncommon as well. These things can shoot dozens of bullets, in just one trigger pull. Right. And so what happened?
Okay, so that obviously is the falsehood, right? Semi-automatic, right? You pull the trigger one time, one bullet gets fired. Okay, can you shoot, hundreds of bullets in a minute? Absolutely, but you have to pull that trigger every single time. So this gentleman obviously is misinformed, as most of the leftists are about guns and gun safety and gun concerns, right? Semi-automatic is not fully automatic. And fully automatic, by the way, is something your general public is not, allowed to get, right? Can you apply for those licenses? Absolutely, but they're given out by the government, and depending on your state, you may never actually get one. Okay, so this guy obviously completely mistaken, right? He thinks that when you have an AR-15, right, your supposed assault rifle, okay, that it's just going to be able to spray all over the place, and that is not the case.
In this case, it's sometimes they have enough time to reload. It's one of the most horrific things for students to be sitting there. You saw this in Uvalde. You see this in Newtown repeatedly, where a shooter has enough time to.
And just to remind you about the Uvalde school shooting, right, where the police were outside the classroom waiting while this person was, in fact, reloading, right, over and over again. I mean, that was some sickening stuff. That was dereliction of duty. And it made you just wonder what was the purpose of having the police there at all. All right. But of course, there were so many other things happening there where the door was left unlocked. It was left open. The person had an altercation with the police, was able to flee into the school, then into the class. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. Okay. But I mean, one of the main solutions from the left is to, let the government be the authority. Let the government be the power. They're going to take care of us. And then what happens when they don't? What happens when they just stand in the hall and let all of the people be murdered? What happens in that case? It seems like a really good argument for, teachers to be able to have, their own CCWs, to carry in the school. It makes a really good argument for schools to be able to lock down completely, right? It makes a really good argument for schools, especially elementary schools, to at least have one armed officer on guard, right? Does that make sense? Right? We've all heard about, hardening soft targets, right? Our schools are very soft targets. They're porous. They're wide open. I know that the school I work at is constantly open, right? There are ways in, especially if you have like contacts on the inside. Okay. Are we hardening those targets? No, we're not, right? We're not really taking it seriously because even though these things happen and they're big headlines for a little while, people tend to get lax in their concern. And that's exactly what's going on here.
Reload, and the horrific nature of this is, for little kids to be facing this.
It's just too much to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little kids en masse, presumably
associated with.
All right. So, yeah, obviously, as we mentioned, the misinformation.
Yeah, it sure is.
Oh, we're back to Klobuchar somehow. All right. So, yeah, there's our misinformation. The thoughts and prayers are not enough. But of course, what's their actual plan? What would they do to actually stop all of this? All right. We got another one here from Gavin Newsom. All right. He's going to come out and slam the GOP for doing absolutely nothing. Looks like we got some Twitter feed. Let me reload this. All right. So I guess I'll just read from Newsom first. We cannot even make it through the first week of school without mass shootings. And that the GOP will continue to do absolutely nothing while our kids are being gunned down. This is sick. All right. So remember, what's the actual solution for this? Okay. What's the actual solution? To treat mental health as a real thing. All right. To go out there and say that, you know what, if you're feeling, weird about your body, is it possible it's just, puberty? Is it possible you just need to get out in the sunlight and, do some weightlifting, feel better about yourself? Is it possible you just have to, grin and bear it and learn how to deal with things that could be a little bit tough, right? Because as we've seen in many of these new reports that I've been following, it turns out that, hey, a lot of these antidepressants don't really help, right? And they actually are the exact opposite of what you want to have happening hormonally in your body when you do have these mental disorders. Okay, and also what they've been finding is a lot of these drugs they put the transgender individuals on, at least this was the case also in Nashville, right? They are basically psychotics. They are things that don't have good end results when people take them for prolonged periods of time, right? And then what are we doing? We're shooting certain segments of the population up with this stuff. And then we're telling them that, oh, it's not you, it's everybody else around you, right? They're all, and of course, this is going to give them some type of complex, possibly. I guess I shouldn't mention that. But the idea is, what are we doing to address the mental health crisis that is happening right now in this nation? Right. And yeah, I agree with Christina June, perversion and confusion. That seems to be kind of where we're at right now, right? Perversion and confusion is what this is all based around. Okay. Because remember, for a long time, when we talk about, homosexuality even, right? Oh, people were born this way. Right? This is who we are. We were born this way. This is how we were made. And now all of a sudden we move forward to the trans issues. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden it's whatever you feel like in that moment. Whatever you feel like, that's what you are. And so which is it? Right? Very confusing stuff. All right. But Gavin Newsom, of course, saying that the GOP will continue to do absolutely nothing. All right. But of course, what are the ideas? Treat mental health properly. That's idea number one. All right. Get away from all of this trans ideology stuff. And by the way, if you are trans and you're trying to function as a normal adult, by all means, you go ahead. But keeping our kids away from all this garbage is paramount, right? Very important. All right. Newsom State isn't doing any better at all. Yeah. And also in Newsom State, if you're a parent and you have a trans child, if you don't affirm them, California can take them away from you. Right? They will take them away and put them up in a foster home and then transition them themselves. Right? But he's in referring to this ABC News report. Let's check this out. Guess we got to watch it on X.
Now in my ear, at least 2 people confirmed dead, at least 12 people confirmed injured. I know you need to get on the horn with your sources to find out if you can see if there's any additional information we can add to that. Pierre, just getting numbers told to me via our.
All right. So, yeah, just the initial reports coming out back, 5 hours ago at this point, and Gavin Newsom talking about that. So, yeah. As far as being prepared for this, I think I've gone through all my material. Thank you for joining in. I'm not done yet, just necessarily. Let's go ahead and I'm sure it's going to be the main topic on Twitter. Let's see if we have any new developments before we're done. A drawing from the Minneapolis mass shooting suspect, Robin Westman's manifesto. Yeah, I don't even want to. I mean, this is a sick individual. I don't even want to get into that right now. I don't want to look at him. So yeah, this was very cathartic for me, and I appreciate you for joining me on this. But just to kind of sum all of this up, right? What are the big differences in terms of handling? Okay, we have, of course, Kash Patel in at the FBI, and we're getting all of this information in real time very quickly, right, about what's happened. Okay, versus the Nashville shooting, where we had nothing for months until it was leaked via Steven Crowder. All right, then we finally got information, and they threatened, when I say they, I of course mean the federal government and the local government, threatened to sue Steven Crowder over the release of these materials. So here we have right away the exact cause. All right, so that's number one, the difference in treatment. Number two, all right, the Democrats, the left, they're going to have a real soul-searching moment. How are they going to treat the trans issues moving forward? All right, because obviously, as we mentioned, they're in a catch-22 right now. They're using the correct pronouns of these people, whether it's Nashville or whether it's now Minneapolis, right? They're using the correct pronouns, which of course I thought wasn't allowed. I thought that was a hate crime, right? I thought that was verboten. You weren't allowed to do that, right? You're dead naming individuals. But now, of course, it's apparently okay because they committed a heinous act, right? Well, why is it only okay to call them by their actual name and gender after they've done a horrible act? Right? So that's number two. And number three, they keep talking about Republicans, right? The GOP. What are they going to do to stop stuff like this? And I want to hear the left's ideas. What would they do aside from a huge gun grab, which is what they always try for, right? What would they actually do? Because I know what I would do. I would get back to treating mental health as a real disorder and get kids off of all of these psychotic drugs that they put them on when they're transitioning and maybe get them some actual help. Right? How does that sound? Right? Not affirming their mental delusion, but instead getting them to adjust to reality in their current body, getting them comfortable with that. So they're not little snowflakes running around, offended at everything and feel like it's okay to lash out and cause physical harm simply because you disagree with someone else. Okay? And the last point, of course, the Democrats, in terms of the gun grab, all right, as I mentioned before, what would happen if, right now they're complaining about Donald Trump coming into D.C., coming to Chicago, coming into California, right? Oh, it's the federal government. He's coming in. He's taking over. He's a dictator. He's militarizing the police, right? How are you going to fight that if you take away the public's guns, right? So don't complain about, government overreach if you're going to take away the ability of the populace to fight back. These are the main points that the left has to deal with. These are the things that are really holding them back from reality, from being honest about having an argument over the situation, about having solutions over all of this. All right. And I guess that's all I prepared. So kind of a short stream today, a little less than an hour, but I wanted to get this stuff off my chest. So thank you very much for tuning in and for watching. And I'll see you next time.